Grandpa's Garden of Stories. Chris had always admired his grandpa's stories, but this was different. This time, he wasn't sitting on a creaky porch listening to Grandpa's gravelly voice. This time, he was going to see where Grandpa had grown up, the very place that had shaped so many of the tales. It had been a few months since Grandpa had invited him on this trip, and now, as the car bounced along the dusty road leading to the village, Chris felt a mix of excitement and curiosity. The village wasn't much like the bustling city where Chris lived. It was quieter, with only a few narrow streets winding through rows of small, simple houses. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and earth. The trees were everywhere, tall, majestic, and ancient. Chris felt as if he had stepped into a living painting, one where the leaves danced in the breeze and the birds sang their timeless songs. Grandpa, who had been a part of this village long before Chris was born, smiled as they reached the old wooden house that he had once called home. "This is where it all started for me," Grandpa said, his eyes gleaming with nostalgia. "Let me show you around, Chris. I want you to see what I saw, and maybe you'll understand a bit more about me." As they walked through the small garden in front of the house, Chris noticed a tall, sturdy tree near the porch. It wasn't just any tree. It seemed to stand like a silent guardian. Grandpa pointed to it with a soft chuckle. "That's the tree I planted when I was about your age," Grandpa said. "I remember it well. It was just a sapling, barely a foot tall. I took care of it like it was my best friend. Watered it every day, talked to it, and imagined it growing tall, just like me." Chris looked at the tree, his eyes wide with wonder. It had grown so much over the years. Its branches stretched wide, and its leaves rustled like old secrets in the wind. "That's amazing, Grandpa. It's so big now." Grandpa nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Yes, it took time, patience, and care. But every year, it grew a little taller, a little stronger. And just like that tree, life needs the same care. You plant the seeds, you nurture them, and eventually, they grow into something beautiful." They walked around the house, and Grandpa showed Chris the various trees he had planted over the years. Some were big, others were still young, but they all had one thing in common. Grandpa had planted them himself, with love and care. The trees had been his companions as he grew up, and now, they were a part of the legacy he wanted to leave behind. "This one here," Grandpa said, pointing to a wide oak, "was the first tree I planted when I left home to study. I wanted to leave a piece of me here, something that would stand tall and strong, even when I wasn't around." Chris reached out and touched the rough bark of the oak tree. He could feel the history in it, the many seasons it had endured. "I think I understand," he said softly. "You planted these trees because they're like your memories, right? And they'll always be here." Grandpa smiled warmly. "Exactly, Chris. These trees are a part of me. They represent the good times, the struggles, the growth, and the changes I've been through. And now, they can be a part of you too." They continued walking through the village, and as they passed by the rows of trees, Grandpa told Chris stories of his childhood. He spoke of the games he used to play with his friends, the adventures they had in the woods, and the lessons he had learned along the way. "When I was your age, I didn't have all the gadgets you kids have today. No video games or phones to keep me busy. But I had these woods," Grandpa said, his voice tinged with fondness. "I spent hours here, running through the forest, climbing trees, and just being free. These trees were my friends, my companions. And every day, I learned something new from them." Chris listened intently, his mind wandering to the forest of his own childhood memories. He realized that even though his world was different, there were still lessons to be learned from nature, just as his grandpa had learned. They stopped by a small clearing, where a beautiful old willow tree stood at the edge of a shimmering pond. The tree's branches swayed gently in the breeze, casting long shadows on the water. Grandpa sat down on a nearby rock, and Chris followed suit. "This willow," Grandpa said, "is where I came to think when I needed peace. It's where I'd sit for hours, listening to the sound of the leaves, watching the reflections on the water. It taught me how to be patient, how to let go of my worries." Chris looked at the tree, taking in its beauty. The pond was still, except for the occasional ripple that formed when a bird dipped down for a drink. For the first time on this trip, he felt completely at peace. Grandpa continued, "The willow taught me something important, that even when life seems uncertain, we can bend and sway, just like the branches of a tree. We don't always have to stand rigidly in one place." Life is about adapting, bending with the wind, and finding strength in our flexibility. Chris nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand that his grandpa wasn't just showing him a village or a bunch of trees. He was sharing pieces of wisdom, bits of knowledge that had shaped the man he had become. It wasn't just about the trees, it was about life itself. As the day began to fade into evening, Grandpa led Chris to a quiet spot at the edge of the village, where the sun painted the sky with shades of orange and purple. They sat in silence for a while, watching the world change around them. Chris felt a deep sense of contentment settle over him. He had always admired his grandpa, but now he realized just how much he had to learn from him. There was a quiet strength in Grandpa, a wisdom that came not from books, but from the simple, everyday moments of life. Grandpa finally broke the silence, his voice soft but firm. Chris, I want you to remember something. Life isn't always easy. It's full of challenges, of tough times, and moments when you feel like giving up. But remember the trees. Remember how they stand tall even in the hardest storms. They bend, they sway, but they never break. Chris looked at his grandpa, his heart swelling with admiration. I will, Grandpa. I promise. Grandpa smiled and placed a hand on Chris's shoulder. Good, because life is like these trees. You may not see it now, but the little things you do today will grow into something big and beautiful tomorrow. Take care of the people you love, the environment, your dreams, and never forget that growth takes time. Chris sat there, thinking about everything his grandpa had shown him. The trees, the village, the lessons. It was all starting to make sense. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Chris knew that this trip would be one of the most important moments of his life. He had seen the roots of his grandpa's past, and he had learned that no matter where life took him, he could always come back to this place, to the wisdom of the trees, and to the lessons that would guide him for the rest of his life.